in today's video, we are going to be predicting the New England Patriots 2025 NFL season. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So in this video, we are going to begin by talking about what happened last season, because in order to talk about the future, you gotta talk about the past. Then we'll talk about what they've done so far to make the roster better, and then at the very end, we're gonna look at their schedule and go week by week and predict how many games they're actually going to win, as well as give you a ceiling and a floor for the New England Patriots. But with that all said, let's go ahead and look at what happened last year. So as you can see, this is their 2024 NFL season. They went 4-13 and had a lot of big time losses. They did have a couple of impressive wins though, some wins over like the Buffalo Bills, the Bengals. They also beat the Jets and the Chicago Bears. In totality, though, it was a year, for the most part, to forget. A lot of highs, but also a lot of lows. I would say a lot of the highs came alongside with Drake May taking over as a starting quarterback and showing some glimpses of a quarterback that could potentially become something special in the league. I felt like last year, Drake May was thrown into a almost impossible situation. He had a coaching staff that was going to get replaced. He had a poor offensive line, a poor receiving core around him, and a running back group that just wasn't very impressive either. You pair that with a defense that at times can be good, but in general last year showed a lot of inconsistencies, and you're talking about a team that was always set up for failure at the beginning. But this team already knew that. They knew this was not going to be a good team heading into 2024, yet despite that, the coaching staff did have a lot of pressure on their shoulders, and so they kind of were forced to throw Drake May into the fire a little bit earlier than what they probably planned. Because when they took Drake May, I thought personally the plan was for him to sit for most of, if not the entirety of the 2024 season, and allow Jacoby Brissett to carry this team to 4, 5, 6 wins. And then in 2025, that's when you hand the keys over to Drake May. Obviously, that was not the case. And frankly, I don't necessarily think that's going to hurt Drake May. If anything, it might actually help Drake May. Really quickly, I want to look at some statistics. Now, granted, a lot of these numbers are kind of skewed because early in the season, there was Jacoby, and then towards the back end, there was Drake. Offensively speaking, they were pretty horrendous. 30th in points per game, 29th in touchdowns per game, 31st in yards per game, and basically every single number was down in about the bottom 5. Rushing the football, they were about middle of the pack. I'll give them some credit. 14th in yards per rush, 18th in rushes per game, 14th in rushing yards per game. But when it came to passing the football, this team was just very inefficient. They were the 26th worst quarterback sack percentage, 16th worst interception thrown rates, and dead last in the NFL in passing yards per game. Now, defensively speaking, there are some things to take away from last year. They were 21st in opponents' points per game, 21st in opponents' yards per game, and 21st in opponents' touchdowns per game. So as you can see from those statistics, offensively, this team was a complete disaster last year, and defensively, they had some glimpses and some hopeful moments, but for the most part, fairly inconsistent and maybe not as good as what you would want it to be. Again, we have to make sure we emphasize those offensive numbers are not necessarily on Drake May. I know everyone's going to point the blame at the quarterback, but frankly, there's not a single quarterback out there that would have seen a ton of success with that offense. Even the likes of Lamar or Josh Allen would have struggled behind that offensive line and with that receiving core and with that running back group. So before we throw the pitchforks and throw the, the towel in on Drake May, let's relax. I thought Drake May had enough glimpses with what was a terrible situation around him to make me feel more than confident that in 2025, he's going to be a great quarterback and in the future could end up being a top 10 level quarterback. But in terms of what happened last year, that's essentially what happened. Offensively, they stunk. Defensively, they were just too inconsistent, but I thought they were competitive in a lot of games, so we have to at least give them their flowers. And heading into this offseason, it was very clear and obvious that there was going to be a lot of changes coming to New England. New head coach, you get rid of Gerard Mayo, you now bring in Mike Vrabel, who, by the way, I think by most accounts we can all agree, great hire. He was so successful with Tennessee, and by the way, those Tennessee teams that he was successful with, those were not the most talented teams in the AFC, yet they were consistently making the playoffs and fairly, for the most part, making pretty deep playoff runs. So if a guy like Mike Vrabel can lead that guy in Ryan Tannehill to success, I think he has the potential to take Drake May to a lot of success as well. So I love the overall hire of Mike Vrabel, and I thought for the most part they did a fine job of surrounding Mike Vrabel with other good coaches that have experience with the organization and some who don't. So I like what they did for the most part this offseason, and in terms of free agency and the draft, I think they hit a home run. So as you can see, this is what they did in free agency. They signed Milton Williams, Stephon Diggs, Carlton Davis, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane, Morgan Moses, Garrett Bradbury and a handful of other depth options / some guys who probably will start. They traded Devon Godshaw, they released David Andrews and Jawan Bentley. Let's get this out of the way. What a productive offseason for a team that had a lot of money. I don't think any of us expected this overall overhaul of a just team. And what's funny is you would think they would spend most of their money on offensive pieces where they really struggled the most. But I kind of like what they did here with Mike Vrabel saying, no, we want to double down on our identity. We want to double down on defense, and then we'll build the offense through the draft and just a couple of pieces here and there. They directly targeted Milton Williams to be that interior defender that can get to the quarterback while also stuffing the run. 4 years, $104 million, maybe a little bit more expensive than what I would want to give Milton Williams, but I think he's a quality player, so I'm willing to live with it. Adding Carlton Davis alongside Christian Gonzalez is a massive upgrade of that cornerback 2 spot. Carlton Davis to me is like one of, if not the best cornerback 2s out there, and I think he just fits so perfectly with this Patriots defense. Adding a Harold Landry, who I know hasn't necessarily been the most productive player as of late, but he can still get to the quarterback. He's an experienced guy, and I think he's had a lot of success with Mike Vrabel in the past, so I'm willing to kind of hear this one out. Robert Spillane is an absolute tackling machine. This dude genuinely comes off the ball and is just looking to make havoc out there. I also think he's a really good leader of this team. He can help you build your culture, and Patriots team that over the last couple years has kind of lost their identity, lost their prestige in a sense. I think Robert Spillane could very well end up being somebody that Patriots fans fall in love with, and I just think he perfectly identifies with what Mike Vrabel wants to do. K'Lavon Chaisson down the board had a solid year last year, so I think maybe he could make some plays. Jack Gibbons, a couple of these other guys, probably some depth pieces down the board here. So all in all, really nice stuff that they did on the defensive side of things in free agency, but they also did some things offensively, such as bringing in a Stephon Diggs to a receiving core that just frankly was not very talented. Maybe not talented, but just not very good. Adding a Stephon Diggs to a 3-year, $69 million deal, I think is fair value for a guy who at this stage of his career is clearly on the downturn. He's no longer prime Minnesota or even Buffalo Stephon Diggs, especially coming off this injury, but you can still look at Stephon Diggs and make a really solid argument that he's a really solid wide receiver 1 for the time being. I do think in the future they would be smart to look at the draft and look at free agency for some more receiving options, but in an offseason where in the free agent market there was not too many great wide receiver talents out there outside of like a T. Higgins, but that wasn't going to happen. Getting Stephon Diggs I thought made a lot of sense. You add him to a receiving core that desperately needed a guy who can get separation, a guy with some versatility, and that's exactly what Stephon Diggs will present to this offense. Morgan Moses, when healthy, is a solid offensive tackle. We just gotta hope he can stay healthy. You pair him with what you did in the draft, I do feel like he's a nice upgrade on this offensive line. Adding Garrett Bradbury, who I don't think is the greatest center out there, but he has experience, he has played. He's probably going to be better than what they were throwing out there last year, especially when David Andrews wasn't healthy. So in totality, offensively speaking, I like what they did. They also added a backup quarterback in Joshua Dobbs. They also added Mac Hollins, who I think is just an awesome do-it-all sort of receiver. In general, I thought free agency was a massive thumbs up for the New England Patriots. Do I think they just completely overhauled the roster? Not necessarily. I still think there's a lot of things they have to work towards fixing, but they added a lot of talent. I think they added a lot of veterans and some high upside guys. I think this was a really solid free agency class, and as we go forward here with the draft, I thought the draft was just a continuation of what this team did in the offseason in terms of free agency. So in the 2025 NFL draft, they started off by taking Will Campbell. They also ended up taking Travion Henderson, Kyle Williams, Jared Wilson, Greg Woodson, Joshua Farmer, Braden Swinson, who I absolutely loved, Andy Borregales, I guess a kicker, Marcus Bryant, Julian Ashby, and Kobe Minor. Now for the draft, I'm really only going to talk about players that I am very familiar with. I'm also not just going to talk about guys later in the draft, because for the most part, those guys will be depth options and, you know, special teams and so on and so forth. So I'll focus in on guys who I think will actually be impactful guys within the next couple years. Let's start off with Will Campbell, a really solid culture fit. If you guys watch the draft, everyone kind of fell in love with Will Campbell because he basically said, I'm willing to die for Drake May, which was just wow, like gave you goosebumps. And this was a team that desperately needed help on that offensive line. I mean, last year they were throwing out some stinky starters at tackle, like Vidarian Lowe was a starter for them, and it just was not working. By adding in a Will Campbell, you get a guy who has been super successful in college, first team All-SEC in 2023, first team AP All-American, All-American in 2024, second team All-SEC as a freshman, and he was also a freshman All-American. This dude has been one of them dudes from day one. He's been super solid. And I think the nice thing about Will Campbell is because this Patriots team had so many holes on that offensive line, whether it was tackle or something in the interior, Will Campbell can truly play any position, and I think he'd be super successful, whether it is playing tackle, guard. I even think he could be an awesome center if he could get his pad level lower. My one concern with Will Campbell is that his stance is almost like he's standing up. I would like to see Will Campbell get a little bit lower in his stance, and because he's so explosive and so strong and so smart, but sometimes he can just play with his pad level a little bit too high because of the way that he sits in his stance before the ball is snapped. In general though, Will Campbell is a guy that every team would want to have. Great culture fit, great starter, great player, great versatility. He'll be a solid piece in this offensive line for the foreseeable future. Round 2, TreVeyon Henderson, former 5-star recruit, was a #1 ranked running back at one point. I know that because I think he shafted my Texas Longhorns. Don't quote me on that, but he goes to Ohio State. Really, when healthy, he was great, but dealt with a lot of injuries at his time with Ohio State. Last year in 2024, for the first time really in a while, he had some help in that backfield with Quinshon Judkins, and both Quinshon and him, they really dominated the ground game for Ohio State. Quinshon being a bit more of your traditional back, and TreVeyon Henderson just sort of being a do-it-all guy. I think TreVeyon Henderson has a very high ceiling. Like, this is a guy who is unbelievably athletic. He's a willing blocker. He can do some stuff in the passing game, and there's really not a flaw to his game. Now, I don't really think he's the greatest pure runner. Like, I thought in the 2025 draft class, guys like Ashton Jeanty, guys even like Quinshon Judkins, I thought were better pure runners. But for a team in the Patriots that already had Ramondre Stevenson, I feel like adding a TreVeyon Henderson is going to really work out. He's a well-sized running back. He's thick, he's strong, he's a willing blocker. Again, he's just one of those guys that seemingly is a really solid culture fit. Round 3, Kyle Williams, a guy that I watched a lot, and as time went on, I just completely fell in love with this guy. I had a round 2 grade on him. He ends up falling to round 3. He's a little bit undersized for a big receiver. He's 5'10", 190 pounds. You're going to put him on the outside. You can use him in a bunch of different ways. Speed demon, absolute monster down the field. Yak guy as well, can win all sorts of ways. I think he's a pretty smart guy. Maybe needs to expand his route tree a little bit. Some nuanced things could definitely pick up on, but you put Kyle Williams next to Stephon Diggs, I think that's a really good mentor for him to look at. Jared Wilson is an athletic center that I want to say ran like a 4.9 or something crazy at the combine. Just a guy who hasn't played a lot of games for Georgia because of just how many veterans they had on that offensive line. Last year, second team All-SEC. He did miss 2 games because of foot injury, but in general, like, this guy's a very high upside guy. I do think he needs some time to sit and develop, and I think having a guy like Garrett Bradbury will allow him to do so. But long term, I think Jared Wilson's athleticism, strength, and as he develops in understanding the nuances a little bit more, you're talking about a guy that genuinely could be a difference maker on this offensive line. I'm not going to talk about any of these other guys, but I do want to talk about Braden Swinson, who, by the way, I had a late round 1, early round 2 grade on him as just a pure football player. Now, I have heard that there were some off the field concerns that brought his draft stock down. With that said, to get Braden Swinson in round 5, I thought was one of the biggest steals of the draft. And by the way, before anyone says, oh, you're just crazy high on Braden Swinson, I've heard a lot of reputable people who are, scouts and who watch a ton of film and watch a lot of these players that had Braden Swinson as like a projected day 2 guy. So to get this guy on day 3, I thought was great value. He's just somebody who is a constant disruptor. He's well sized at 6'3", 255. I think he's more of a traditional 4-3 edge, but I also could see a world where he plays an outside linebacker role at times. He's physical, he's strong, he can get to the quarterback. I'm not saying he's ever going to be a superstar in the making. Like, he's not anybody who I think will be a Micah or a Nick Bosa, but I think to get a guy in round 5 that has that level of upside, I mean, just get the off the field stuff taken care of. And I truly believe that Braden Swinson could be a fantastic player for this team. So I'm very excited about that pickup. I also did like the Joshua Farmer pick, and I also like the idea of getting a kicker in the round 6. I think that's just kind of funny, and a long snapper. So shout out to them for getting their special teams potentially in order. In general, a draft class that you get potentially 3 to 4 impactful guys, maybe even 5 impactful guys. And I'm not even including the special teams guys. If you include the long snapper and the kicker, who will probably be starters, that's about 6 to 5 guys that I think could potentially be starting and getting a lot of reps in year one. So to have that draft class, I just thought was fantastic. So in general, big ol' A plus, thumbs up for me in both the draft and in free agency. Let's go ahead and look at the depth chart, and then briefly we'll talk about their schedule and what their ceiling and floor is. So let's go and look at the depth chart. I do want to primarily point out what I think this team still needs to prove upon. And let's get this out of the way. This is just year one, so there's a lot of ways this team could still go. At quarterback, Drake May. At running back, Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson. You also brought in Antonio Gibson, who might be a bit more on special teams. Stephon Diggs, Demario Douglas, Kyle Williams, Mac Hollins, Kayshawn Boutte, and Kendrick Bourne. Not to mention Jalen Polk, I think was your second round pick last year, and Javon Baker. Pretty deep wide receiving core. I just feel like you have to figure out who your guys are, and maybe one of these guys off the bench can step up and kind of fill a role here for this team. Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper, still a solid tight end duo. I do think eventually within the next couple years they're going to want to find a bit more of a higher upside guy. In the offensive line room, Will Campbell, Cole Strange, Garrett Bradbury, Mike Onwenu, and Morgan Moses. Significantly upgraded offensive line. Still think I'd like to see some upgrades maybe in the guard rooms. Mike Onwenu is a good player, but Cole Strange has been a little bit up and down. I do think this offensive line will look a lot better though, and I think by like week 6 or 7 we will know exactly how good this line is and where the team needs to find upgrades. Also, having Jared Wilson as your backup makes me feel pretty good about that center position. Focusing on defense here, I do think this team needs to look for a true edge rusher who can just get after the quarterback, but you do have Milton Williams who can get to the quarterback. Christian Barmore hopefully can stay healthy. You also have Kyrus Tonga as your sort of, interior run defender. Jacqueline Roy, Joshua Farmer, we'll see if he can get some playing time. But off the edge, you have Harold Landry, who did have a couple sacks last year, but I think in the future you might want to find a bit of an upgrade there. Christian Ellis, Robert Spillane at linebacker, love that. Jelani Tavai as well. Anthony Jennings and Kalavion Chason and Braden Swinson. We'll see who can kind of win that second pass rusher role. I do think in the future, if they do have a first round pick, I'd like to see a bit of an upgrade in the edge rushing room. And then in the secondary, Carlton Davis, Christian Gonzalez, and Marcus Jones. Feel really good about my corners. You also have Jabril Peppers, who hopefully everything off the field is taken care of, and Kyle Duggar at safety. This is not a finished product by no means. I still think another pass rusher would go a long way. I also think some help in the offensive line room in the future could go a long way depending on how that looks. Another wide receiver one could also work for this team, but I love where this team is heading, and I think Drake May actually has a nice team around him. But with that said, this is their schedule. We're going to go week by week, and I'll give you how many games I actually think the Patriots will win, as well as what their ceiling is, and as well as what their floor is. In week number 1, the Las Vegas Raiders are going to be playing the New England Patriots. Give me the Patriots to win this one. I love what the Raiders are doing. I think they're heading in the right direction, but I think New England is just a little bit better and a bit more talented right now. This game can be close, but I think Patriots will win. Versus the Miami Dolphins, I do think this Miami team can score some points. I do worry about this team, but at this stage, they will be healthy. I'm expecting a bit of a high-scoring game here by both New England and Miami. I will give the win to Miami, though. In week 3, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers, and even though I'm not quite yet sold on this roster, I am going to give the Steelers a win. They just know how to find ways to win. They have a solid defense, assuming TJ Watt returns. And with Rodgers, I think they'll just be a bit more of a veteran team. So I'll give the win here to Pittsburgh and to start the season off with a 1-2 record. By the way, I do think they'll start the season a little bit slow, but as time does go on, I think we'll find some more wins down the stretch. In week 4, you have Carolina. I'm actually going to give the win to the Patriots here. I do think Carolina is an improved team, but I just think right now the Patriots are a little bit more well-constructed of a roster. Week 5, Buffalo, I got to give Buffalo the win. New Orleans, Tennessee, and Cleveland, I'm going to give all 3 of those wins to the New England Patriots. These are 3 rebuilding teams that have a lot of question marks. Potentially 3 rookie quarterbacks could be starting if Shador wins that job. But I'm going to give the win here to the New England Patriots. And through 8 weeks, the New England Patriots are now 5-3. Atlanta, Michael Penix Jr. should take a step forward, so I'm going to give the win here to the Atlanta Falcons. Tampa Bay, they're one of the better teams in the NFC. I love what they're doing over there. Baker Mayfield is an incredible quarterback and has just gotten better and better every year. So I'm going to give the win here to Tampa Bay, which puts New England at 5-5 heading into week 11 versus the New York Jets. This is an interesting game because I do think the New York Jets are talented, but I have a lot of question marks about what does Justin Fields look like? What does the coaching staff look like? I'm going to give the win here to the Patriots to put them at 6-5. Versus Cincinnati, I'm going to give the Bengals the win here. I just think Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase is a lot to handle, and I'm just not sure if this offense right now can keep up with those guys. Versus the Giants, I'm actually actually going to give the Giants a win here. Now, I do want to say this. I think the Patriots are just as talented as New York. I think New York is a little bit more talented, and New York has to win some games this year. Their schedule is absolutely brutal, so whenever they get a team that's not contending for titles, I think the Giants should try and win those games. So I'm going to give the win here. Heading into your bye week, you're currently sitting at 6-7, which I think is a great start to your season if you are Mike Vrabel and Drake May. With your last couple games here, you have the Buffalo Bills and Baltimore Ravens. Not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to call those 2 losses. And then to end the season off, I'm going to give you 2 wins versus the Jets and the Miami Dolphins. So if my predictions do come true, that means you'll end the season with an 8-9 record, which I think will be a positive step in the right direction. In terms of what their ceiling looks like for 2025, I do think their ceiling is relatively high. I'm going to put their ceiling at around 11 wins, but I'll put their floor at about 6 wins. I think they'll be a much better team than what they were last year, but I'm not quite yet ready to push the playoffs button on this team, so that's kind of why I have them at 8-9. With that said, if you do tell me, hey, the Patriots made the playoffs, I wouldn't be shocked. Mike Vrabel's great, Drake May is great, it would make sense. But let me know in the comment section below, how many wins will the Patriots get in 2025, and will they make the playoffs? Love you guys. Peace.